34% of used Miatas need a major repair within 2 years of purchase, but that number is an average, and averages lie. Some model years have failure rates under 8%. Others are above 60. Same car, same badge, completely different odds. 3 years are financial disasters, 4 are virtually bulletproof, and number 1 worst is the year dealerships push hardest, because it's the one they can't move. This isn't opinion, this is ownership data. Let's expose them all. Worst number 3, the 1990 NA. When the original NA generation Miata launched, the global automotive press heralded it as the brilliant rebirth of the classic British roadster, but infused with flawless Japanese reliability. They completely lied to you. If you look at the classic car classified ads right now, you will see thousands of people selling their early 1990 Miatas for absolutely astronomical prices, banking entirely on the massive pop-up headlight nostalgia trend. What those greedy sellers are desperate to hide from you is a massive, fatal engineering flaw hidden deep inside the engine block. It is called the short-nose crank syndrome, and it is a mechanical death sentence. Here is the brutal mechanical reality of the situation. Inside the 1.6-liter V6 ZDE engine, the heavy steel crankshaft dictates the mechanical timing of your entire motor. On the very front of that crankshaft sits a heavy harmonic balancer and a timing belt pulley. Mazda engineers made a catastrophic, unforgivable miscalculation on the earliest engines manufactured in 1989 and 1990. They machined the nose of the crankshaft far too short, and they utilized a microscopic, incredibly fragile Woodruff key to lock the heavy spinning pulley to the rapidly rotating crankshaft. When you go to buy a 1990 Miata, you must look incredibly closely at the main crank pulley while the engine is idling. If you see it wobbling even slightly, walk away immediately. That visible wobble means the internal keyway is completely destroyed, your critical engine timing is heavily fluctuating, and your motor is literally minutes away from total, unrecoverable failure. To fix a short-nose crank, properly and permanently, you have to pull the entire engine completely out of the vehicle and completely replace the crankshaft. By the time you pay for the professional labor, the main bearings, the rod bearings, the gaskets, and the machining, you have spent significantly more money than the entire 30-year-old car is actually worth. In late 1991, Mazda quietly realized their massive engineering blunder and introduced the Big Nose crank, extending the metal and completely solving the issue. But the 1990 models? They are a ticking time bomb. Do not buy one unless you are fully prepared to execute a complete engine swap the absolute second you drive it home. If you think a wobbling crank pulley is a terrifying mechanical nightmare, wait until you hear how the engine in our next worst year literally drops its internal organs onto the asphalt when you press the clutch pedal. Keep reading. Have you ever bought a used sports car only to find out the engine was a known, documented factory defect? Tell me your absolute worst lemon story in the comments below. And if you deeply respect brutal, honest mechanical truths, hit that subscribe button right now. Let us continue the teardown. Worst number 2, the 1999 NB. In 1999, Mazda dramatically redesigned the Miata, introducing the NB generation to the world. They entirely ditched the iconic pop-up headlights for fixed aerodynamic lenses to pass global pedestrian safety standards. They stiffened the chassis, and they introduced a heavily revised 1.8-liter engine known internally as the BP4W. Visually, it was a stunning, curvy evolution. Mechanically, for a very specific, doomed batch of engines, it was an absolute massacre. The 1999 Miata is infamous among seasoned mechanics for suffering from catastrophic thrust-bearing failure. Let us break down the internal engineering so you understand the severity of the threat. Inside the aluminum engine block, the massive, heavy steel crankshaft spins thousands of times a minute. But the crankshaft does not just experience rotational force, it experiences extreme longitudinal force, meaning violent front-to-back movement. Every single time you push your heavy left foot down on the clutch pedal to shift a gear, the physical pressure from the heavy clutch pressure plate physically pushes the entire crankshaft forward toward the front radiator. To stop the heavy crankshaft from violently grinding directly into the soft aluminum engine block, engineers use a critical component called a thrust bearing. It is a small, semicircular piece of incredibly soft metal designed to completely absorb that immense forward pressure. In the early 1999 engines, specifically those falling precisely within the vehicle identification number range of 100,000 to 130,000, Mazda completely botched the thrust bearing design and the critical machining tolerances of the number 4 main bearing cap. Because the tolerances were too loose, the factory thrust bearings literally fall entirely out of their designated slots and drop straight down into the oil pan. If you ever test drive a 1999 Miata, leave the car idling in neutral with the parking brake fully engaged. Then, firmly engage the clutch pedal. If the engine revolutions per minute suddenly drop dramatically, or the engine completely stalls when you press the clutch, the crankshaft is walking. The sheer physical friction of the steel crank grinding against the raw aluminum engine block is physically overpowering the combustion torque of the engine. Once a thrust bearing drops and the crank walks, the engine is absolute, irredeemable garbage. You absolutely cannot rebuild it. The main bearing caps are utterly destroyed, the block is heavily scored beyond repair, and the crankshaft is completely ruined. You must buy a completely new engine block from the factory or a salvage yard. Mazda issued a quiet technical service bulletin about this specific issue, but they absolutely ruthlessly refused to officially recall the cars, leaving thousands of innocent owners completely stranded with seized engines just outside of their factory warranty period. Avoid the 1999 NB1 generation entirely. The financial risk is simply too astronomical to justify the purchase. Crankwalk violently destroys the engine block, but what happens when Mazda puts the manual transmission on a severe starvation diet to save weight for the marketing brochures? The next vehicle on our list features a transmission so incredibly fragile that it literally explodes under standard highway acceleration. Prepare yourself. Worst number 1, the 2016 N1. In 2016, Mazda launched the highly anticipated fourth generation of the Miata, officially known as the ND. The global automotive press completely lost their absolute minds, praising it to the heavens. Mazda proudly announced their massive, Skyactiv design philosophy, boldly claiming they had ruthlessly shaved hundreds of pounds off the chassis to return the modern Miata to its ultra-lightweight, nimble 1990 roots. What the slick marketing brochures completely failed to mention was exactly where they dangerously shaved that critical weight. They shaved it directly off the internal steel gears of the manual transmission. They built a manual gearbox out of absolute fragile glass. The 2016 ND1 manual transmission is mathematically, structurally, and fundamentally defective. In their desperate corporate pursuit to save weight and boost fuel economy numbers, Mazda engineers utilized incredibly thin, highly fragile gear teeth on second and third gear. When you accelerate the vehicle and quickly shift from first gear into second gear, or from second gear into third gear, the immense kinetic torque of the engine violently hits those dangerously thin steel gears. The terrifying result? The teeth literally shear completely off the gear shaft. You will be driving down the open highway, go to pass a slow-moving truck, execute a rapid shift into third gear at 6,000 revolutions per minute, and you will hear a horrific, violent, metal-crunching explosion echoing directly from beneath your center console. You will instantly lose all forward momentum, your engine will loudly over-rev, and your fragile transmission case will be completely filled with jagged steel shrapnel. Mazda quietly knew they had massively screwed up the engineering. Over the next 3 agonizing years, they silently released version 2, version 3, version 4, and eventually version 5 of this specific manual transmission, trying to thicken the fragile gears and alter the metallurgy to stop them from violently exploding under normal loads. If you are shopping in 2026 for an ND generation Miata and you see an incredibly cheap 2016 model with the original version 1 manual transmission, run away. Do not walk. Run. It is absolutely not a matter of if that transmission will explode and leave you with a massive $4,000 repair bill. It is simply a matter of when. We have waded through the garbage, the oil leaks, the shattered steel, and the corporate lies. But Mazda also forged undeniable perfection. The next 4 vehicles are mechanical legends that will easily outlive you if you maintain them. Keep reading to discover the absolute greatest Miatas ever manufactured in history. Best number 4, the 1994 Eden NA8. If you demand the iconic, nostalgic pop-up headlights of the first generation, there's only one specific year you should actively hunt for on the used market, the 1994 NA8. This is the absolute, undisputed golden era of the classic Miata. By 1994, Mazda had completely, permanently resolved the terrifying short-nose crank issue that plagued the earlier models. But much more importantly, they realized the original 1.6-liter engine was dangerously underpowered for modern, fast-moving American highways. In '94, they introduced the BPZE 1.8-liter engine. This significantly larger displacement engine block provided a massive, highly noticeable bump in mid-range torque, allowing you to actually pass highway traffic without praying to the automotive gods for a tailwind. But the true, undeniable holy grail of the 1994 model is the drivetrain. This was the very first year Mazda introduced the legendary Torsen limited slip differential, specifically the highly coveted Type 1 iteration. Previous early Miatas used a primitive viscous limited slip differential, which utilized a thick silicone fluid that completely broke down and failed after roughly 50,000 miles, turning the car into a highly unpredictable open differential nightmare. The torsion, which stands for torque sensing, differential utilizes heavy-duty, complex helical worm gears. It relies entirely on brilliant mechanical leverage, not degrading fluid. It is mathematically, structurally unbreakable. When you throw a '94 Miata into a tight hairpin corner and violently smash the throttle pedal to the floor, the torsion differential mechanically locks the rear wheels together, pushing you out of the corner with absolutely zero wheel spin. It is pure, unfiltered, glorious traction. Here is a massive secret that only seasoned grease monkeys know. The 1994 model is the last great year before the federal government completely ruined engine tuning. In 1996, the federal government mandated highly complex OBD2, which stands for Onboard Diagnostics Version 2, emissions computers. OBD2 computers are highly restrictive and constantly throw annoying check engine lights if you slightly modify the exhaust or intake manifold. The 94 model utilizes the old, primitive OBD1 system. It is basically the Wild West of engine tuning. You can tune the engine, bolt on a massive supercharger, or completely rip out the catalytic converter for dedicated track use, and the primitive computer simply does not care. Today, a pristine, rust-free 1994 Miata is a highly appreciating financial asset. Expect to pay anywhere between $8,000 and $12,000 for a clean, rust-free example. It is the ultimate classic analog roadster. The NA is a nostalgic classic, but what happens when you take that exact same bulletproof 1.8-liter engine, bolt advanced variable valve timing to the cylinder head, and drastically stiffen the chassis structure? The next car on our list is a surgical, highly lethal track weapon. Best number 3, the 2004 NB2. The second generation NB Miata is often foolishly overlooked by casual, uninformed buyers who solely obsess over pop-up headlights. Let them obsess over their headlights. Their sheer ignorance leaves the absolute best driving dynamics on the used market completely open for the true, hardcore driving enthusiasts. If you want the ultimate analog driving experience, you must hunt down a 2004 NB2. By 2004, Mazda had completely perfected the NB chassis architecture. They realized that convertible sports cars naturally suffer from cowl shake, a violent, unpleasant shuddering of the windshield frame when hitting deep potholes. To completely cure this, Mazda engineers executed a massive structural reinforcement campaign across the entire vehicle. They added heavy-duty steel gussets to the transmission tunnel, massive steel butterfly braces underneath the floor pans to tie the subframes together, and heavy shock tower braces directly from the factory. The 2004 chassis feels like it is carved directly from a single, solid block of heavy metal. The tech specs define modern, aggressive refinement. The 2004 model is powered by the legendary BPZ3 engine. The absolute secret weapon here is VVT, which stands for variable valve timing, located directly on the intake camshaft. If you have the financial budget, 2004 is also the exact year Mazda released the absolutely legendary Mazda Speed Miata. This was the only factory turbocharged Miata ever produced in the entire history of the company. The Mazda Speed Edition featured an aggressive IHI turbocharger running 8.5 pounds of boost, forcefully pushing the engine to 178 horsepower. But they didn't just lazily bolt on a turbo, they massively upgraded the entire drivetrain. They added a heavy-duty 6-speed manual transmission, a Bosch torque sensing differential, massive Bilstein suspension dampers, and highly aggressive 17-inch Racing Heart alloy wheels. Even if you buy the naturally aspirated standard model, the 2004 comes equipped with massive sport brakes. These heavy-duty rotors are massively oversized compared to earlier years, providing brutal, immediate, completely fade-free stopping power that rivals modern supercars on a tight autocross track. Whether you buy the standard VVT model or the turbocharged Mazda Speed, the 2004 NB2 is mathematically the most structurally rigid, best-handling traditional Miata ever built by the factory. Used prices range heavily from $7,000 for a clean base model all the way to $15,000 for a pristine, unmolested Mazda Speed. The NB is an analog dream, but what if you want a chassis so incredibly overbuilt that you can daily drive it for 200,000 miles without a single mechanical failure? The most hated generation of the Miata is actually the greatest secret in the automotive world. Keep watching. Best number 2, the 2013 NC3. Welcome to the absolute most controversial opinion in the entire Miata community. The third generation, known as the NC, is universally mocked by internet keyboard warriors. They relentlessly call it a boat. They loudly claim it is too heavy, too bloated, and far too soft for track use. Let us completely destroy the heavy boat myth. Yes, the NC weighs roughly 150 pounds more than the older NB generation, but do you know exactly why it weighs more? Because Mazda borrowed the highly advanced chassis architecture directly from the legendary Mazda RX-8 sports car. The NC features a highly advanced, massively sophisticated multi-link rear suspension system. Older Miatas used a primitive double wishbone setup that would violently snap oversteer if you hit a mid-corner bump while accelerating. The multi-link suspension on the NC actively controls dynamic toe-in during heavy cornering, keeping the rear tires absolutely, undeniably glued to the asphalt under the most extreme, violent lateral G-forces. It is a hyper-stable track weapon that practically begs you to push harder into every corner. But the incredible engine is why the 2013 NC3 truly makes this list. The tech specs define unkillable, massive endurance. The 2013 model utilizes the incredibly robust MZR 2.0-liter engine, but Mazda didn't just use standard, off-the-shelf parts. For the NC3 generation, Mazda quietly upgraded the engine internals directly from the factory. They installed a massively strong forged steel crankshaft and highly reinforced forged connecting rods with fully floating wrist pins. Look strictly at the objective data. If you pull the official National Highway Traffic Safety Administration records and the car complaints database for the 2013 Mazda Miata, you will find something absolutely astonishing. 0 massive recalls, 0 widespread mechanical complaints, 0 catastrophic engine failures. It is arguably the absolute most statistically reliable sports car produced in the entire decade. In 2026, you can easily buy a pristine, low-mileage 2013 NC3 for roughly $14,000. You are getting forged engine internals, elite RX-8 suspension geometry, massive fender flares, and unkillable reliability for the exact price of a used, boring Honda Civic. Let the internet haters mock the boat while you absolutely destroy their lap times on the racetrack. The NC is an unbreakable tank, but what happens when Mazda decides to expertly merge the ultra-lightweight ethos of the original 1990 model with blistering modern horsepower and flawless modern technology? Best number 1, the 2020 ND2. Earlier in this incredibly brutal breakdown, I explicitly warned you to run far away from the 2016 ND1 because the fragile glass transmission would violently explode under pressure. But Mazda did not ignore the massive problem forever. They went back into the engineering laboratory, fired the greedy accountants, and engineered a massive, highly successful correction. In 2019, Mazda released the highly anticipated ND2 generation, but to ensure you completely avoid the early production run electrical gremlins, the absolute sweet spot to buy right now on the used market is the 2020 N2. This is the absolute, undisputed zenith of the modern roadster. The tech specs are a massive, breathtaking leap forward in natural aspiration. Mazda tore the 2-liter Skyactiv engine completely apart. They drastically lightened the rotating mass of the pistons, heavily reshaped the intake ports for maximum airflow, significantly increased the size of the exhaust valves, and installed an incredibly aggressive high-lift camshaft. The undeniable result? The horsepower skyrocketed from a pathetic 155 in the early models to a blistering 181 horsepower. But the raw numbers do not tell the whole story. Mazda massively increased the engine redline from 6,800 revolutions per minute to an incredibly aggressive 7,500 revolutions per minute. The engine absolutely screams. It begs to be violently revved to the electronic limiter in every single gear. It completely transformed Miata from a casual slow cruiser into a high-strung, aggressive canyon killer. But what about that terrifying exploding glass transmission? For the ND2, Mazda finally executed a brilliant mechanical fix. They completely redesigned the entire manual transmission, adding heavy-duty casing ribs, but most importantly, installing a massive dual-mass flywheel. A standard single-mass flywheel transfers the violent kinetic shock of shifting gears directly into the fragile transmission teeth. The completely new dual-mass flywheel utilizes a highly complex series of heavy internal radial springs and dampers to physically absorb and dissipate the violent kinetic shock waves created when you dump the clutch pedal. This heavy mechanical buffer completely protects the transmission gears from violently shearing. The exploding transmission crisis was entirely cured. You can absolutely abuse the 2020 gearbox on a track day, flat shifted at redline, and it will ask for more. The 2020 ND2 hits the absolute perfect depreciation curve for smart buyers in 2026. You are successfully avoiding the massive initial depreciation hit of buying brand new off the showroom floor, but you are still getting a heavily modern, technologically advanced sports car equipped with the fixed transmission and the high-revving 181 horsepower engine. Expect to pay anywhere between $20,000 and $24,000 for a highly optioned club or grand touring trim package. It weighs an incredibly light 2,300 pounds. It produces 181 horsepower, and it corners like a laser-guided missile. It is the greatest modern sports car money can buy. If this mechanical teardown saved you from making a financial mistake or helped you successfully discover your ultimate dream roadster, hit that subscribe button, click the like button, and leave a comment below telling me exactly which of these mechanical legends you are going to hunt down for your garage. There's a video coming up on your screen right now. Click on it. I'll see you there.